Texas Longhorns add Travis Shaw, defensive lineman out of North Carolina, to its commitment list out of the portal, marking the fourth portal pledge of the Longhorns campaign. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Jerry Hamilton and Rod Babers of On Texas Football. This is the Sunday night live stream brought to you by our friends over at RogueShop.com. We'll talk about more of them later. But, Jerry, let's start with the big guy out of North Carolina that is the latest Texas Longhorn pledge.
Yeah, Travis Shaw. He's originally from Grimsley High in Greensboro, North Carolina. He came out of high school as a five-star prospect. He signed with Mack Brown and the North Carolina Tar Heels like Rod Babers did. He got the in-home visit. He signed with North Carolina over Georgia and Alabama coming out of high school. I mean, he was the number one player in the Tar Heel State coming out of high school. He's really grown. He's a over-the-ball player. 6'5", 330 pounds with 3 years of experience there in the ACC and at North Carolina. In those 3 years, he has posted 55 tackles and like I think 6 tackles for loss. Not a sack guy. He's an over-the-ball player, but he had a good junior season in 2024, 26 tackles, 4 tackles for loss there. Playing primarily over the ball. So, again, CJ and I talked about this yesterday on our recruiting and portal update. You know, with Sadir Mitchell transferring, that really opened up a spot here to go with Cole Brevard over the ball because Alex January, they want to play at the 3, right? Melvin Hills is not an over-the-ball player. We'll see what Josiah Sharman, Myron Charles end up being, but they haven't enrolled yet. But Texas wants 4 D linemen out of the portal. Now they have 2. And they have 2 big bodies, both 330 pounds, to play over the football and rotate there. So they have Kenny Baker and Texas staff. They have hit their needs over the football and that zero shade tilt player so far out of the portal. And now we'll see how they attack the other couple of spots at defensive line.
Yeah, I think it's terrific. This is the 2 that they needed. They had to absolutely get big-bodied guys, Jerry. Stats not necessarily telling the entire story of defensive tackles, by the way, for those of you worried about that sort of thing. Jerry, how important are these not only Travis Shaw, but also Cole Brevard, who's been practicing with the team, by the way, already out of Purdue?
Well, I think it's huge. I mean, obviously, Brevard, like you said, already practicing. Shaw will be there in a matter of a week. January 12th, 13th is when guys are moving in. But I think it's huge. I mean, look, so now you go into spring practice, just if nothing else happens, because remember, Jermaine Lole was a late guy last year. So this is not the only portal window. You have grad transfers. You have the spring portal window. So I'm just saying if they had no other D linemen, I'm not saying that's going to be the case. There's a couple other guys out there, Terry Webb from Texas State who's visited Auburn, who Kenny Baker happened to recruit some out of high school out of Western Kentucky. So we'll see if there's any movement there. But you have Brevard, you have Travis Shaw, you have Alex January, you have Melvin Hill. So you got those 4 guys. You have Justice Terry practicing with the team. You have Myron Charles and Sharma coming in. Suddenly, you're up to 7 guys. So suddenly your numbers are there for spring practice. And I think that's a key. And the other key there, if they don't add anybody else now, which I'm not saying is the case, those freshmen are going to get a ton of reps. Because Texas, Kenny Baker, they have to get these guys prepared. They're going to have to play, I think, a couple of those guys are probably play more snaps than Alex January did last year. So they have a good number now. I suspect, I'm not going to sit here and say for sure. It wouldn't shock me if they didn't have one more guy added by the time spring practice rolls around or by the time this semester begins to get to a solid 8. But that depth is starting to build, and they need a front line, I think, guy to compete with Alex January at the 3. Rod Babers, I'll let you talk about that as well. But so far, that's 2 big pickups over the ball because the one thing about portal guys, and just this is one thing I'm gonna be like a broken record on. Kenny Baker wants guys that can play the run.
Mm-hmm. Definitely on the interior, man. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely on the interior. So if you can't play the run, there's a lot of guys that people have asked about in the portal. If they don't go on some guys with some stats, it's because they don't believe they can really play the run at the level needed. I mean, in Texas, first game next year is at Ohio State. They're going to have to play the run out of the gate.
Yep. No doubt about it. Hey, Rod B., we're going to talk to you in a second. A couple other updates of note. Marvin Jones Jr., who Texas took a look at, the defensive end out of Florida State, has committed to Oklahoma. Also, the Branch brothers out of USC, the wide receiver Zachariah and his brother Zion, a defensive back, have committed to Georgia. We reported yesterday on TexasFootball.com that the Branches would not be visiting Texas this weekend. There are some other guys out there that are in the portal that Texas has some interest in, but I'm being told that all eyes right now on the prize, Rod B., and that is Friday night, Texas versus Ohio State, the national semifinal. The Longhorns taking on Ohio State. You and CJ Vogel produced or put up a video this morning, Rod, talking a little bit about that game. A lot of Ohio State fans saying, hey, that's not our offense anymore. We've switched up our offense quite a bit from the Michigan game. Now we're trapping it on the interior more, and we're throwing it deep more often. What do you have to say to that? I mean, is that something that Texas fans need to? Obviously, we're aware of it, but is it something that the Texas team actually needs to be concerned with?
Yeah, I mean, they have they're basically kind of hitting their peak, right? That's potentially what you're dealing with. Ohio State playing their best football. It's like that Michigan game kind of woke the beast up, right? And they played their best football, some of their best football in the last two games. That's the case for Jeremiah Smith. That defense is like Texas defense. It's been playing great all year long. So I don't know if that's shape, but the offense has found a new identity. We talk about Texas, right? Their bread and butter concept being the wide zone, the outside zone, right? And they didn't have one run for at least 10 yards versus Arizona State. I don't say they averaged less than 2 yards per carry on outside zone, on the wide zone concept. And we've seen Georgia game, Arizona State game. It really stalls the offense, or at least stalls the running game. And I was looking, and there's some cases Ohio State's their running game is also kind of hit some lulls at times. Michigan, Nebraska, in that game, and of course that Oregon game. There were times where it hit low. I think the what happened with them was more injuries, and it could be the case with Texas too. Cam Williams going out, Kelvin Banks dealing with injuries definitely hurts your ability to execute wide zone if you don't have the tackles on the outside, that dominant presence there. For Ohio State, they've had several injuries on the offensive line. They lost Josh Simmons. They lost Seth McLaughlin in their center. They had to move around Donovan Jackson from the interior back to the outside. So maybe they're just starting to gel with some of the new pieces they moved around on the offensive line. But they've started to run more power and counter, like power gap schemes as well. In the last two games, so basically, and we'll get into this in our preview later on this week, but Ohio State on the season, right? They're 56%, gap power schemes. That's close to being half and half, pretty balanced in your attack between gap and zone. They're at 88% in the last two games. Gap power schemes, mostly counters. And it's just the counters working really well for them. Pro Football Focus says they're averaging over 7 yards per rush in the last two games running counter. Strange thing is, this was the same thing versus Arizona State. When Arizona State was running, now they have different bodies on the line of scrimmage. They were running in the last two games prior to playing Texas at over 80% gap power schemes, and Texas was able to at least limit it early on until the dam broke because they were exhausted on the field too long. So really, just like you stop right now, Texas is wide zone, and you can really stall their run game. You got to stop the counter right now for Ohio State. That's been some of their bread and butter. They still love the inside zone because that's what Chip Kelly does. That's what he loves. But they're saying that they have broken tendency in the postseason on the offensive side, and that's why the running game has found a new, identity, if you will.
Let me ask you this, Rod. Texas, you're talking about the Texas running stats and then the Ohio State running stats. The Texas running stats has not been good against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl or in the SEC Championship, or against Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. How much of that do you put towards Kelvin Banks being out against Georgia and Cam Williams being out against Arizona State? Cam Williams, by the way, back on the practice field today and looking pretty good. My guess, based on what was seen today, he will be out there on Friday for the Longhorns returning from injury. How much can be attributed to those two tackles being out at times?
Yeah, I mean, that's what Ohio State fans are saying about their run game. It's like, oh, man, it wasn't our run game that really suffered. It was the injuries on the O-line. But I think you're right. I mean, not having arguably the best tackle combination in college football together at the same time. Definitely affects your ability to hit the wide zone and to be able to run out there on the edge. Ain't no doubt about that. Hey, Rogue Shop, appreciate you. But it's one of those things where I do think having those guys healthy will help you. I will say this though, Ohio State, watching them on film because of their edges, which we'll talk about in detail as the week goes on, they are really good. They may be the best team in the country defending wide zone. You do have to kind of come downhill on them, run some inside run game, gap power schemes against them and counter. And Texas can do that, but that hasn't been necessarily, as we talked about, their bread and butter. So, hey, man, in big games, good teams are going to force you to break tendency. They're not going to allow you to do what you do to beat them. And right now, Ohio State breaking tendency at the right time, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
All right, if you're just joining us, breaking news, North Carolina defensive lineman Travis Shaw has committed to the University of Texas. He played 3 years at North Carolina. He is 6'5", 335 pounds. He joins Cole Brevard out of Purdue as two defensive tackles from the transfer portal that have committed to Texas at this point. Texas now has 4 transfer portal guys altogether, but Travis Shaw visiting Texas over the weekend this week. Big pickup for the Longhorns because they need big bodies going into next year. Jerry Hamilton joining us as well. Jerry, some of your thoughts on what Rod had to say about Ohio State's run game and or the Texas run game.
Yeah, so I want to add something else on portal because I'm on the move today, and I was told something during my long drive is that Texas wanted Zechariah Branch, but they just didn't have a safety spot for Zion Branch. So just to be clear on that, and they were going to go to the same school. And so Texas liked Zechariah Branch at wide receiver return man. If it was just him, they'd have been all in. They didn't feel like there was a spot for the safety, Zion Branch. And so that affected, and we talked about that. What would be an NIL possibility for Zion if Texas took a look at it? Well, there wasn't going to be one from a depth and standpoint at Texas at the safety position. So just wanted to put that out there. Yeah, I think, look, it's Ohio State has their whole front four is going to be drafted. I mean, let's be real. They're all going to be drafted, and they're all probably going to be drafted in the top 3 rounds. And Tyler Williams may be the highest drafted guy amongst the 4. He's getting some first-round mocks. JT is as well, late first-round guys. But, so I think the whole key is, as Rod said, you have to block the edges if you're going to attempt outside and wide zone against Ohio State, which I'm not sure that's going to be the go-to run this game. But if you don't, you have to contain their interior guys too. I mean, this is a real 4-man front that Texas is going up against. Rod, arguably the best 4-man front Texas has gone up against is now Georgia because the linebackers made them different. Yep. But this is probably the best 4-man front, and they have depth behind it. I mean, they got couple 5-stars that didn't even get on the field this year. Edric Houston, one from Buford. Edric Houston from Buford, Georgia is one of those guys who's a 5-star player, and you really hadn't seen much of him this year. So they have depth as well behind it. Tywone Malone. They have some guys who are really good players in that program that have either been recruited there or transferred in. So there's depth on this defensive line. You got to handle the whole thing. I mean, it's a tackle, guard, center, guard, tackle game for Texas. Everybody's going to have to play well, in my opinion.
I think they don't have a lot of they're like Texas defense. There ain't a lot of weaknesses to work with. I mean, you're just dealing with elite players, and I think I just I love the scheme. We talked about Jim Knowles and the 3 high scheme. I think Texas had Sark faced off against him once, I believe. Before he went to Ohio State. But I think ultimately you can attack the corners. That, to me, if you just look at what the weakest part of the defense is, I think the corners can be added. That's the most favorable matchup for Texas, looking at their wide receivers. Now, I'm not saying that they're weak corners. That's not at all. I'm just saying of the positions and of the levels of the defense you can go after, I think the corners are the most susceptible and most vulnerable considering Texas wide receiver, especially if Bond plays. The problem there is, man, you got to make a lot of NFL throws to try to take advantage of those guys. You want to like make a lot of NFL outside the, outside the numbers in between the
throwing guys open, Rod. Throwing guys open game.
Yeah, it's going to be one of anticipatory throws. So it's a Quinn, of course, this point during the season, Quinn's going to go out there and make more NFL throws. If we get the Quinn that played the last 5 minutes of the Arizona State game and double overtime, man, you got as good a shot as anybody to beat Ohio State. But if you don't get that Quinn more consistently throughout the 4 quarters, it's going to be a challenge because this defense it's legit, man. It's legit every level.
Rod, I struck on something and wanted to ask you this. Texas threw over the middle of the field in the final 5 minutes and in overtime. They didn't throughout the entire game except for the first quarter. And they had success in the first quarter. Is that something Sark, you think, opts not to do because it puts the ball in harm's way more? I mean, why wouldn't they do that more frequently in game other than just throw it deep? Like that's a fair question, right?
Can I lead Rod into this? Arizona State wanted Quinn to throw it outside the numbers deep. That was part of their game plan. Early.
Yeah, because they had the middle of the field. Remember, the deep middle of the field defended pretty well early on in the game. But in terms of the intermediate area of the field or short to intermediate area of the field, that is a great question. I'm not sure why. It did seem like later on, there are a lot of things he went to later on that probably should have went to earlier in the game. We talked about this, right, on Second Watch. I won't spoil it, but go back and watch Second Watch, and then you'll see what we talked about there. There are a few things, though, that he went to when the fit hit the shan, that you wonder why you didn't see more of that throughout the entire game. And so, but, like I said, it's as long as he came through in the clutch, which they all did, I won't complain as much. But I also am curious to that, Bobby. Not against this group, can you throw up the middle? Potentially in between the safety and the linebacker. That's an intermediate area, but you point out that's the most dangerous area of the field. And now they're playing more the inverted too deep. And I'm reluctant to call it inverted Tampa 2, which is what we've come to know it as, especially from Big 12 country. But he has to invert it safety out of his 3 safeties and the 2 deep safeties, and then one of them like almost down facing triangle to the defensive front, and it's Caleb Downs usually who's that guy, and they're doing all types of freaky stuff with him. Sometimes he's dropping into the box, sometimes they drop all 3 to be 3 deep, sometimes they rotate him and shift him, sometimes one goes to a single high, both 2 guys drop down. They're doing all types of funky stuff with that in the last 2 games. They used it obviously throughout the season, but I think they're using it a little bit more in the last 2 games, and they're weaponizing that guy. So that's to me, scary part about throwing intermediate area of the field if they start running that formation a lot, that structure a lot.
Texas and one of the solves for the 3 high safety look that Sark had at one time, Rod, was going to the jumbo tight end, and you talk about getting them out of that look by being extreme in your offensive looks. Is that something you suspect Sark might try to do? But I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Ohio State, we talk about Texas being a great defense, and they are. Ohio State's the best defense in the country statistically. And we talk about how many points Texas needs to score. Only one team scored more than 30 points on Ohio State all season. That was Oregon, 32. And they didn't score 30 in the second go. So what are your thoughts as it relates to that in that maybe what Texas could do on offense to give Jim Knowles a little bit different look that Sark has utilized against other 3 high teams?
Yep. And in the Big 12, and like I said, this is a different animal than the Big 12 defenses and the Big 12 3 high that Jim Knowles had there at Oklahoma State. It's a different beast. But he did do, I think, a really good job of finding an antidote to the 3 high. And essentially the way I, kind of discuss it or decipher it as, he just went with a lot of extreme formations and personnel groupings. And it would force the 3 high out of its disguise. And the 3 high, it's all it is disguise. That's its number one, unique element and unique trait that makes it so effective. Is that it's disguised is really, really well pre-snap and then post-snap. You just don't know what the guys in the back in the during, and it changes the numbers, changes some of your RPO reads, your pre-snap reads. You may change it to the wrong play, all that kind of stuff. And the extreme formations and personnel groupings would force the three high guys, some of those back end guys, to go, I got to get to my run fit, because if they come at me with a 6-0 line package and I'm out of my run fit, they're gonna run right downhill on me, and I'm gonna be in a lot. I'm gonna be in trouble, right? And I'm gonna be at a disadvantage and leverage wise in the game. So he started going with he would go with quads at times too. You'll see this against Iowa State. I went back and looked at my notes from a couple years ago. He would go with quads to one side, an unbalanced and even a covered player, instead of going with the 6-0 line package, which he says is kind of a waste of a man now because everybody knows that he's blocking, he's not going out for a pass. He would just cover up a Gunnar Helm and just use Gunnar Helm as that extra offensive lineman, and either they were going to run it or they would kind of break out some of the RPO game off of it and look for matchups and isolate defenders. And it worked really well. I like empty to also, force the three high out of its disguise. And so if you go with some of these extreme formations and personnel grouping, especially like power personnel groupings, pony package, he's going to like to do 12 personnel, but I don't think 12 personnel is extreme anymore because everybody does it. Can be extreme if everybody does 11 and 12, and everybody runs 11 and 11 and 12 personnel. So I think you got to get into a pony package. I think you got to get into 6-0 line. I like the big 11, big 12 package, and then force it out of disguise, clearing up the pre-snap read for your QB and for the coach and for Sark on the sideline. So I think that's what you do. Not all the time, obviously. You don't have to be extreme with it, but I think you got to mix in some of those things a little bit more.
If you're just now joining us, by the way, when Rod talks about the pony package, he means 2 running backs.
Yeah,
that's what Rod calls it, the pony package. 11 personnel is 1 running back, 1 tight end. 12 personnel is 1 running back, 2 tight ends. For those folks just getting there, Jerry, I need to go with you because we've got a couple of questions coming in about the portal, and then I also have an NFL question that I think really is germane to this entire game. Because both teams have a lot of draft picks going to be on the field this week.
Yeah.
Juan Garza, does Texas get the other 2 defensive linemen in the spring window, Jerry? Anthony Evans, young man out of Converse Judson, who's played at Georgia, was a return guy at Georgia, played some wide receiver, went into the portal today. Is Texas a possibility for him? And also, Jerry, Tucker Foster wants to know if Texas is still pursuing A&M wide receiver Noah Thomas, who is looking at Miami as well as Georgia right now. A couple of updates there first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about NFL talent that's going to be on the team on display in Cowboy Stadium on Friday.
Yeah, so we'll see on the D line. There's not really any way to know that for sure right now. Look, it depends on if somebody else jumped in the portal. But I mean, I mentioned Terry Webb from Texas State is a guy that we're just lightly watching here because the guy that Kenny Baker recruited some out of high school at Western Kentucky. And he's turned into be a good rotational player. He's visiting Auburn, I believe, right now. So we'll see if there's something there. A lot of this just comes down to NIL, the fit, and all of that. Noah Thomas, look, Miami went all in on the branches, and they didn't get him. So a guy like Noah Thomas, just even though they're different players, just becoming that much more valuable for Miami now. But I think with Branch going to Georgia, does Georgia take 2, even though they're totally different players, wide receivers out of the portal? You asked about Anthony Evans. I don't, that would probably surprise me a little bit. I mean, because he'd be going into situations similar to what he just left. And we've talked about that before. And he probably has a higher NIL value somewhere else where he could be a starter and more of an truly impact player for a program. So we'll have to see there. But I think Texas is going to fill their needs. I'm interested to see what happens at tight end because tight ends, what they want a tight end, but they've only brought 1 tight end for a visit. Somebody asked for Ty Lockwood out of Alabama, who's in the portal. 1 catch, 5 yards, not a guy Texas offered out of high school. Doesn't mean they wouldn't take a look at him, but I mean, these guys they're taking have a lot of production. I mean, Brad Spence is a starter. Cole Brevard's a starter. Travis Shaw is a starter-level player. Jack Brewmeister is an all-conference, 2-time all-conference punter. So I think they're looking for starter-level players that would actually could play in a rotation at a couple of positions.
Yeah, wide receiver being one of them. You mentioned tight end, Jerry, being another. And then where do they go? I mean, do they want more than that? It sounds like Tashard Choice is not going to look for a running back based on what we talked. We talked to him last week at the Peach Bowl availability. Maybe tight end, you mentioned that, or they're going to try, and then maybe more defensive tackle. Outside of that, Texas already has its linebacker in Brad Spence out of Arkansas. Yep. He was a starter there, and they got two defensive linemen in the punter. They don't need a quarterback they don't need a DB, at least not right now. You don't think. Maybe if some great one comes along, but they seem to have not gone very hard after Takario Davis out of Arizona. So we'll see what else they have to do. All right. Hey, this one from Girded Loins, and this is the NFL question I want to push to for you guys both. How do we feel about Norton and Lole in the upcoming draft? Simultaneous to that, how many draft picks, how many future NFL players are going to be on these two teams? I mean, seriously.
Yeah. So Todd McShay on a podcast a couple of days ago, said 27 probable draft picks, just draft eligible guys that are expected to go combined with these two teams. So 27.
So draft eligible, so they could either come back another year or stay at 27. That's
so that means he's saying 13 for Texas, 14 Ohio State, because he said 13 for Texas going into the Arizona game. If the guys come out that everybody thinks is going to come out. So 13, 14. Lole in the draft, he has a draftable grade, but he's had so much injury history. That's the tough thing for him. Bill Norton, if he wants to be in a camp, he can be in a camp, but I don't think he's going to be a draft pick. Lole had a draftable grade preseason because we had Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl on. But again, he's had 3 surgeries. So where does that stack up for him, Rod, on draft day and in workouts and with the medical? I mean, that knocked Jordan Whittington down. When you've had multiple surgeries, that's a big thing to overcome, especially for a guy on the interior.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunately that day on draft day, it's more about the upside. What's the upside of a player, and nothing decreases your upside like injuries as a football player. So they may like him as a player and consider him, hey, we'll get him in these lower rounds where we don't have to devote as much draft capital to him. We like him though as a ball player, or we have him as a priority undrafted free agent. But unfortunately, on draft day, that's going to affect your money. There's no question about it. Doesn't mean you can't play ball though, as we've seen.
By the way, I think there's a chance we see 10 of the 11 Ohio State starters drafted in the next 2 drafts.
Defense on defense?
Yeah.
And they have 8 seniors, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Who's the one that's not getting drafted? Who's that guy?
You got one sophomore, and if he's starting at Ohio State as a sophomore, he's likely getting drafted.
Caleb Downs is your sophomore.
Yeah.
That guy's going to get drafted.
Top 5 pick. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah.
All right. Hey, guys, real quick, want to say thank you to our sponsor, Rod B. Do you mind telling the good folks about our friends over at RogueShop.com? Good people over there, and have helped a lot of people.
Yeah, no doubt. And we appreciate Rogue Shop for joining us on the show today. Shout out to Rogue Shop. Just saw them in the chat, and we appreciate Rogue Shop. And also, they can bring their fantastic products to you no matter where you are in the On Texas football community in the continental United States. They can ship their products to you nationwide, bringing real plant medicine back to its roots. I recently talked to a member of the On Texas football family who said they love Rogue Shop. Said actually they swear by it. It helps them get sleep, and they use some of the products for pain relievers. But they got all types of products for you folks, whether it's oils and creams, flour, gummies, vitamins. If you have sleep issues, dealing with sleep deprivation, or say dealing with anxiety, which a lot of us deal with, or you're just dealing with pains like me, because I got a ton of those for my NFL days. Our friends at Rogue Shop have a variety of different products that can help you folks. So reach out to them. Go to RogueShop.com. That's RogueShop.com. Use that discount code ON Texas. You'll get a very special code from our very special friends over at Rogue Shop, bringing real plant medicine back to its roots. That's RogueShop.com.
All right, guys, got a couple other news and notes we need to go over. Of course, the breaking news today or tonight, Travis Shaw, defensive lineman out of North Carolina has committed to Texas, giving Texas now 4 portal players or portal prospects who have committed to the Longhorns. 6'5", 335 pounds, a guy that Texas needs desperately, with at least 8. Texas losing 8 defensive tackles this offseason, just to give you an idea. All right, a couple other things to talk about. One is the defensive players. Several defensive players met with the media today. We'll talk a little bit about Michael Taff and some interesting things he said post Arizona State and that hit he made on the wide receiver. And then also our friend Adam Schefter broke some news that teams are potentially looking at Steve Sarkisian in the NFL. So I'm going to go directly to that now. Terrence Pickens, our worry level of Sark potentially leaving early to the NFL. This has happened before. It's not the first time. Some people mentioned it a year ago. Jerry, what is your take on this situation?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and 100% say we know, but it would surprise me if he left during the Arch era until after the Arch era is over.
That's me
now,
too.
I mean, that's where I come out on it. But, look, who knows? If he goes on and wins a national championship, you just never know. Is that the goal? I mean, but people have to remember Jimmy Sexton is his agent. And if you're Jimmy Sexton client in the playoffs, good things are going to happen for you with your extensions.
Yes.
And I don't mean hair.
Yeah. Rod, what do you think? Is Sark made for the NFL? I know he's had a cup of coffee there.
I think bad news for Longhorn fans who love Sark and want him to be here until he retires. I do think he has some NFL aspirations. That's the bad news, because I don't think he'll be here, till he retires. Because the good news is, I think he wants to win a national title first, and then go to the NFL and try, obviously, to win a Super Bowl. So I think at one point, if he wins a national title, that's part of, I think, his journey. He wants to check some things off the list and be like a Pete Carroll.
Yes. Who
did both. And it's just known as it's just a ball coach. Jim Harbaugh, it's just a ball coach. Hey, in college, don't matter if it's college or pro, it's a ball coach right there. You want to be known as one of those dudes. So it's a good news and bad news. I don't think he'll leave until he wins a national title. But I do think if he wins a national title, you might have to think about that reality that he'll look at the league a little bit. And it may not be about money at that point.
Yeah, it may not be.
Money. Yeah,
it's about challenge.
Yeah, exactly. He'll get past the point where it's about money, because Texas, when he went national title at Texas, we're going to give him a bag anyway, just for the hell of it.
Right. Hey, by the
He's
way,
already got a bag that's what, 8-figure or whatever.
Yeah, but when I'm sure there's a bonus in the contract by winning a national title, ain't there? No, I'm sure there is. Man.
Oh yeah. I think I think Ski Break said it's a $500,000 game for Sark.
Just to get into the finals.
Oh, this one?
Yes.
Oh.
And then it's $1 million, I think, if you win it, or $750 if you win it.
And I would want it in cash. I'd be like, I need it in cash. I just want to see that much of it. Have it right there in front of me like a game show when I get to the locker room.
Hey, Jerry, a little bit more on what you said.
1.25 in his NIL and an NIL fund like Brian Kelly did if he wins it all. Hey, by the way, I want to say this too. There's a couple of cool things about the playoffs. But Texas still a 6-point dog, by the way. Notre Dame a 2-point favorite over Penn State. So there's a couple of really cool things about this playoff now that's left. One of the 4 coaches will win his first national championship. There is going to be nobody that's won one left. The other thing is, all these teams actually do play the NFL schedule because all the teams in the bye lost. So somebody has to win 4 games to win it all. And we wondered if when this playoff started, were you at a disadvantage? If you had to play win 4 versus 3 to get it done. Everybody left has to win 4. And it's kind of crazy how it's fallen. A coach is going to win a national title for the first time. He is going to become a college football Hall of Fame level coach. And then it's going to be somebody who's going to play the full season, is going to have to win 4 games to win a national title, which when all this started, I don't think we thought any of those things would probably be happening right now. That's what we'd be looking at.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, Jerry, before I address this one thing. But I want to go back to Arch in a second, if you don't mind. The other thing I want to say, talking about interesting anecdotes, and look, there are 10 schools across the country, 8 really, that carry the name brand recognition of Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Penn State.
Yeah.
So you throw in Michigan, throw in Alabama, throw in Georgia, throw in USC. I mean, there's about 8 to 10 of those schools. Well, these are 4 of them. These are 4 of the Blue Bloods, right? What's absolutely striking to me is I went back and looked at it, and somebody had mentioned this to me. At the end of the 1969 regular season, this is why you're a Blue Blood, okay?
Yeah.
At the end of the 1969 regular season, these are the same top 4 teams. Now, different order, right, as of right now, but these are the same exact 4 teams 50 some odd years later, 60 some odd years later, actually, or 50, 55, I guess.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Old money. Old money.
That's why they're Blue Bloods in the first place.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yep.
Correct.
Exactly.
All right, now, Jerry, just think about Arch. I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay. You said that you think he wants to stay with Arch. Sark's a quarterback guru. Loves quarterbacks. Can it's rare you get to coach a Manning. You really think that's a draw over being the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, per se, or New York Jets or something like that?
Well, yes, because look, I don't think as somebody who's been an OC in the NFL, when he does, and I agree with Rod. I think all these guys have NFL aspirations on some level, right? Especially the offensive guys like Sark. He won't look at a team that doesn't have a good quarterback situation.
True.
He's at a university that has a good quarterback situation. I don't think he would put himself in that spot. Now, again, the whole key is, you know what? He said how much he's obsessed with winning a national championship. The one thing only Steve Sarkisian would have to answer at some point is if he happened to win the thing this year, does he feel like he accomplished his goal in college? I mean, it'd be a hell of a resurrection story for him. One of the best of all time in college sports. So that's the question he would have to answer. But for a guy that has been through what Sark has been through, being an OC in the NFL, he whenever that time comes, if that time comes for him, he's not going to risk his career on bad quarterbacks.
Yeah, there's no reason to.
Yep.
No,
agreed. Yep, that's smart. Or if he really gets close with Arch, then they'll try to get him to the team that drafts Arch.
1-1, baby. 1-1. It's the first team drafting almost always has a new head coach.
Yeah, it's like, hey, let's just take it package deal.
Hey, there's both sides though that too with the NFL. Lincoln Riley missed his window.
Yes.
Yeah, he did. You got to cash in.
By the way, he missed his window.
No, you know what else did? Matt Campbell did. Now Matt Campbell might get it back.
missed his
Matt
window.
Campbell still, but remember he was the hottest name for a while. You do got to cast a lot of shit, but Sark's in a different situation because I think at Texas there's longevity to it, like you guys said. So, but I don't think he'll leave until he wins a couple of national titles, guys. And by then, y'all will be so fat and happy. Y'all will be like, all right, you know what? Go find somebody else. It's all right.
Hey, Jerry, here you go. Are we interested in Ben Bell, the defensive end out of Texas State? I'm not even aware that he went in the portal. He had 3.5 sacks this year. Was a four-year player for them. I'm not sure that that's a name I've heard at this point.
I haven't heard the name, but he is in the portal, and he's a quality player, but not a name we've heard to date. That doesn't mean something couldn't happen.
Okay. This one from Ty Watts. Texas boasts a highly talented roster. We talked about that. With loaded future draft picks at nearly every position. However, if you could bring back 3 players from last year's team, who would they be?
I think he means this year's team, but I could be wrong. Ty Watts, you mean this year's team that's still playing? If 3 guys could come back from that team? I have a feeling that's what he means.
What do you
mean?
mean?
I could be wrong.
What do you mean? Like this year's team?
This year's team is still there.
Yeah.
I guess he means last year. I thought he might have misworded that. Like with all these guys going to the draft. If we're going off of last year, I mean, we had this discussion the other day. It's the The best answer of all was Bird Auburn last year versus Bird Auburn.
Last year's version.
That's probably.
I don't think 3 points is going to win this game, though. So you
No.
might want to second guess that one.
I love Trey Weiser, but it's Jonathan Brooks for me.
I'll say yeah, because Sweater Murphy. Which one? You got to take one of them dudes back. Got to have one of them dudes.
Well, based on the last game, it's Sweat.
I know that's having you choose between Sweat and Murphy. I guess it is Sweat, but oh man,
because Alfred Collins and Vernon have done well at the 3.
That's true. It's a good point. That's fair. That's a good. No, you're right. It is Sweat. Good point, Jerry. You're right. That's true.
I think it's Xavier Worthy.
He said 3. So.
I know. I want Xavier Worthy.
He's the number 1 guy.
I'll take Worthy, Sweat, and
Brooks.
You said Worthy because Bond.
I have a hard time not saying Adonai Mitchell. Jeez. But I would go Brooks because you need somebody to run inside.
Yeah.
No, who versus Ohio State? Honestly, you do need Sweat versus Ohio State because you need to try. If you can stop the run with the light box, that's what Michigan did, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry to veer off top, but I went back and watched that Michigan. They had them 2 war daddies inside in that defensive front, and they kept their safeties back a lot. I mean, they played a lot of too high, try to limit explosive plays, and turn Will Howard into Will Spill the Pill Howard. That's what you got to do. And can Texas do that? Last year they did it better than anybody in the country. Last year.
What question on the Ohio State defense now from Lane Seawright? Thank you for the super chat. Is the Ohio State front 7 elite in the way Georgia was, where they overwhelm you, or are they more beat you to your mark like ASU? I know this. I mean, anytime you start 8 seniors or above, you're a smart defense typically. So maybe they beat you to your mark. I will say this. They may, even though they have a very talented front, and Jerry referenced this, I'm not sure they have a top 10 pick on that defensive front like a Jalen Walker. Do they?
No, I don't think they do. I don't
think they and Michael Williams. They have guys that are going to be late first, second, and third round guys. I don't know if they have dudes that are going to have 5 sacks in one game. No,
they don't have that. They don't have that. But I was going to say, I was looking at this right now just so people know they have the most sacks of any team still in the playoffs. So Jack Sawyer has 8. JT Tuamalo has 10. Their D tackles, Tyler Williams has 2.5. Ty Hamilton 3. Their backup end edge, Kenyatta Jackson out of Florida has 1.5. The one thing they do, Rod Baber, is Cody Simon rushes the quarterback from the linebacker spot. He's got 7 sacks and 7 pass breakups this year, by the way.
They love blitzing their box linebackers.
Sonny Styles has 4 sacks. They got a bunch of guys. They got a number of guys that get to the quarterback on this team.
Yeah. It's they're kind of like Texas. Like Texas, Texas doesn't have a first round pick in their front 7. I guess maybe in the future, Anthony Hill's that guy in the future, I guess. But you ain't got a ton of those guys. They just play really well as a unit. Like they're so that they know that Jim knows system in and out. Just like we talk about how the players know PK system. They know it now. Like you can tell the guys, there's no thinking out there. And they're hive-minded. That's how that defense is, man. It's pretty dialed in. Especially in the front 7, stopping the run.
Hey, by the way, I want to say this too. There's a question in the chat, which I think is a good one. Has Ohio State faced an NFL quarterback this year? If you look at their schedule,
Dylan Gabriel is either going to carry a clipboard in the NFL or set all kinds of records in the Canadian League.
Right.
He's going to be one of those 2, right?
The one
Drew Lair is an NFL quarterback.
Yes, that's the one for sure that they've faced. Nico, not at this point. Michigan didn't have one. Curtis Rourke.
Nico will carry a clipboard at the very least.
Could Curtis Rourke carry a clipboard in the league? I don't know, but they have not faced a ton of NFL level quarterbacks.
Neither has Texas.
No,
neither has Texas.
At least Texas faced 2 in a row. That's a good thing for them.
Rod, this one for you, because you've been there and done this. Is 10 days from Justin Yarbrough? Thanks, Justin. Is 10 days enough for the defense to get ready to go after 100 snaps and 15 games? God, 15 games. He's right about that part, Rod. Your body through this for young kid, that's a big toll, hefty toll to pay. 15 games and 100 snaps in game 15. What do you think?
Depends on how many plays I have to defend in this game, in the next game, right? If I'm at 60, 65 plays defended, something like that, hey, I'm okay. I'm 60, I'm okay. But if I'm defending 80, something plays, 80, 90 plays, then yeah, you're going to see that wear and tear. So the fourth quarter, I think, and this should be a fourth quarter game, that will be the determining factor. The Texans have legs in the fourth quarter, and you then haven't had to run with, two wideouts like this. I worry about the DBs. The DBs play the most. I mean, I know the guys on the front, they have the toughest jobs, but they rotate those guys a lot more than the guys on the back end. I mean, you have Makuba and Janae Barron. Those guys had like 100 snaps or something like that total in the game. So the DBs now running with these two first-round picks at wide receiver, that can be a challenge, especially when you had a quarterback who can extend the play last. And that's people don't realize it's 97 plays. Go clock how long the plays were. They're long. They ain't just snaps. This dude's running around for 7 seconds. It's long, man.
Hey, Rod, I told you the number, didn't I? How many plays? I counted the number of plays that Sam Levitt extended the play. Truly extended it and did not get sacked.
How many?
And he ended up either throwing the ball away or scrambling.
Yeah.
13.
Exactly.
Out of 51. I mean,
that's a lot, man.
That's a hell of a. I mean, he did some work. Yeah. And so I will say this, like Will Howard can run. We've seen him run against Texas and be successful. But he's not
that twitchy.
Yeah, he's not as he's more of a get going and then he runs a 4.6 or 4.65, something like that. This Levitt guy was more athletic than I think anybody accounted for going into that. I don't know about Mike Vick now. Come on. Jet Jones.
He was twitchy.
I thought Mike Vick literally let somebody fly over his head one time and then go and hurdle somebody. Levitt wasn't doing that.
And I'm not saying he's going to be as good of a player. Athletically, kind of look like Josh Allen moving around. I'm not saying he's be that level player, but he's maybe that level twitchy athlete at the quarterback position.
Oh, I think he's a twitchier athlete than Josh Allen, but not as fast.
Yeah.
Not as fast.
Josh Allen's pretty twitchy.
And he's also really strong.
Yeah. I'm not comparing them as players, just the ability to move around against high-level pass rushers.
Eric 76, thank you for the super chat. Can you guys explain how a QB can make a wide receiver better and how a wide receiver can make a QB better? I think this is what we're dealing with Quinn this year versus last year. Worthy, Mitchell, JT Sanders, Golden, and Helm are more possession wide receivers. I definitely would call Matthew Golden that.
Yeah.
But he's going to be a possession receiver in the NFL. Gunnar Helm, I think, is actually less of a possession receiver than JT Sanders, actually. What do you make, though, Rod? I'll let you try to take this one on.
Yeah, that's interesting how a quarterback can make a wide receiver better. I think ultimately it's if you can find, because I was talking to actually had Jordan Shipley on. Coach brought his son, brought Jordan Shipley on, and we were talking to Jordan about about being a wide receiver and his connection with Colt, and basically how it really advanced their relationship when they got into option routes. Basically, depending on how they're being defended, they'll have different multiple options that they can go to, but the wide receiver and the quarterback have to be seeing the same thing and on the same page. Right, Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison made that, I think something that was more mainstream in the NFL. But it happens all the time. It's been happening, since the beginning of football. But I think ultimately they do help each other. It all depends on the preferences of the quarterback. Like we talked about this Arch Manning, right? And when Arch Manning, before he had his first start, I said, Arch Dick's a long ball. He's going to throw it deep. He just likes chunking it deep. He does. it's just part of his game, his preference as a QB, and that's just probably the way that he was developed. And different quarterbacks, they do have those. We talked about this with Quinn, that Quinn's not a natural deep ball thrower. So I think there's a marriage between the skill set of the quarterback, limitations, their ceiling, upside, all those things, and then you find the receivers ultimately that really can either help them, facilitate that skill set, or that really complement that skill set. And then you got to find the marriage with the offense too. So it's a lot, I think, that goes into a quarterback reaching his ceiling or the wide receiver. Now, some wide receivers don't need any of that. They're just no matter what quarterback they got out there, who's throwing the ball, they're gonna be good. That could be a Jeremiah Smith. It just don't matter. Maybe he's one of those. Ryan Wingo's probably one of them dudes. I don't know if it mattered what Texas quarterback was out there. But we talked about how some quarterbacks, this guy likes this receiver. Oh, this, we know that, Quinn likes Gunnar Helm and he likes Matthew Golden. He likes both of those guys, right? When Arch came in there, it was kind of a different vibe. Right? Arch was going to some different guys. Could just be that's who we preferred, that's who we worked with in practice, or it could just be their style. So I don't actually know the answer, but I have observed it, and I observed the highest level, which I think is Colton Jordan Shipley. I don't think I've observed kind of the synchronicity those guys had. I don't think I've ever observed that between on myself. I'm dealing with my own eyes, and like I said, at the NFL level, that's something else. A Peyton Manning and a Marvin Harrison, that kind of thing, or a Joe Montana and a Jerry Rice. But I do think ultimately a coach like Sark, he takes that into account when he's bringing in wide receivers, all those things about his quarterback and their preferences and their skill sets, because he's a quarterback guru, and he's a quarterback. I guarantee if you asked him, he'd say, I like these kind of wide receivers. I like these guys that precision route runners, or I wanted a guy that had the twitch. And Jordan always talked about the top of his route. He's like, the top of my route, man, I want to be violent. And I always thought, man, you were violent. I remember watching him at the top of the route. He was really violent. As a DB, I always said, that's hard to cover. The guy was violent.
He taught his brother the same thing. His brother was a violent cutter in and out of routes. Violent.
Like just break something. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, to add to what Rod said, I think there's two things that a quarterback can absolutely do to make his receivers better after the ball snap. Throw a guy open, and location on 50-50 balls, back shoulder balls. I mean, those are the two things when you look at that I think a quarterback can really help make his receiver better. A receiver, if for instance in the college game, a receiver that makes a quarterback better. There's two of those guys. I mean, Jeremiah Smith's like a freak, so that's different. One's a Xavier Worthy, who can be a catch and run guy, and he could catch it. He maximizes every single play after the catch, right? Those guys, Jalen Waddle did that at Alabama. Those guys. And then you have your guys, receiver that makes a quarterback better, besides being a precision route runner, is if you're not the most accurate quarterback and you can get it to the area code, he still goes and bails you out. Who can win and bail your quarterback out that maybe is not the most accurate guy? Those are the hardest guys to find, though.
Those were the Tom Herman receivers. He liked those guys. Those were your Colin Johnsons and your right. Those were your
LJ
Humphreys. Yeah, just get in my vicinity, man. If it's 1-on-1, I'll make something happen. Troy O'Meara was supposed to be that guy. He did against Texas.
Yes, he did. Good for him. Good for him. Hey, we got about 4 or 5 more questions. One last thing, and I want to get to our sponsor real quick. But Jerry, when we were starting this season, we had heard actually in the summertime that Quinn and Matthew Golden were connecting quite a bit and understood each other and throwing to each other. That's actually transpired as the year wore on, right? That actually came to pass. So I think that when you hear about stuff and you talk about quarterback and wide receiver and that that understanding of one another, that's what it's talking about. That's what Rod's talking about.
And by the way, what Quinn has missed the second half of this year is the catch and run receiver in Isaiah Bond.
Yes.
The guy who makes a quarterback better, Isaiah Bond. Texas offenses missed that the second half of the season since the Oklahoma game. Bottom line, because that's the one thing they really haven't been able to replace. You can't replace 4.28 or 4.3 speed, whatever it is. but that's the one guy that's been injured that he's taken away from the Texas offense, in my estimation, guys, because they just haven't been able to replace that catch and run explosive receiver like Isaiah Bond. He's a one of a kind on this team.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. Rod B, tell folks about our friends over at Rogue Shop one more time. We got about 4 or 5 more questions we're going to get to after that. Rod?
Yes, sir. And thank you very much to our friends over at Rogue Shop, rogueshop.com. If you're having any issues with anxiety or pain management, sleep deprivation, there are a variety of products at rogueshop.com that may be able to help you. They have a lot of different flowers, creams, different gummies and oils, great products. They can ship to you nationwide, by the way, no matter where you are. Our friends over at rogueshop.com can get their products to you. Use the discount code on Texas and you'll get a very special discount from our very special friends over at Rogue Shop, bringing real plant medicine back to its roots. rogueshop.com. Go check it out for yourself. Great products over there at rogueshop.com.
Thanks, Rod, very much. All right. This is kind of funny. Jay Inch, over under on Texas taking a portal or grad transfer kicker. Here's the a week ago this time when we were down in Atlanta. When did I go to Atlanta? Monday. So yeah. So it would have been about a week ago. I literally Jeff Banks was asked point blank, "What are you going to do about kicker next year?" Oh, well, Bert Auburn's coming back. Fast forward 1 week. What's his answer today? I mean, he may not even be the kicker on Friday night, much less next year.
Yeah.
So I would say that Texas is likely to look in the portal for a kicker. I would have not said that a week ago today.
It's amazing.
I know but
it's shocking.
That shows how precious that can be. We'll see. We'll see if Banks goes back on it or stays to it. We'll have time here to mark it. Juan Garza. I agree with Jerry. I think if Sark wins the national championship this year, I think he stays with Arch. And if he wins with Arch, I think he's gone. Also, an African-American head coach will represent their team in the national championship. That's definitely true. James Franklin and Marcus Freeman, the winner of that game, obviously playing. And I believe, Rod and Jerry, this will be the first African-American head coach in a national championship game. Now, they've obviously multiple have been in the NFL, but not in college football. I think that's accurate. I read that somewhere. Y'all know about that?
I can't.
Our producer saying, yes, that's accurate.
I can't think of one. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what do you think about this whole Arch staying, going kind of thing with national championship? Maybe.
Man, I think Jerry makes a point there. Now, is Sark thinking about all of this? Probably, not. But is it somewhere in his subconscious? That's kind of what we're talking about in terms of psychoanalyzing Sark. I do think winning the national title is one of his goals. Well, we know that's one of his goals. He's talked about that openly. And you win one, you want to win two. So winning one, and then I think with Arch, it's a Manning. He's a quarterback guy. First family of football who trusted him with the next generation of Manning. I do think he thinks that's a responsibility there. And Sark's a pretty loyal guy, and Arch has been pretty loyal considering the current landscape of college sports. So I agree with that. I think Jerry makes a good point. I think, he's like, now Arch might be, for Arch, it's something special there just because, like I said, it's a Manning. And I do think because of the loyalty thing, there's definitely been an understanding, and a conversation behind the scenes with the first family of football about the development of the next generation of Manning. And I think Sark wants to, play that out.
I gotta say this real quick. Luther Heggs, we're not pulling that up. We're not falling for it, Luther Heggs in the chat.
Love has limits. Can you compare Ohio State's offense to Washington's offense last year? Boy, Washington
different.
I gotta say this. Not only is it different, but Michael Penix was on fire at the end of last year, guys.
Yep.
On fire. Now, maybe Will Howard may be a good quarterback and may even be a better pro quarterback. I kind of doubt it, but nobody is as exacting as Michael Penix was at times last year. I mean, just tremendous. I mean, he's throwing the ball on the dot 40 yards downfield.
NFL arm. Yeah, make sure to defend every blade of grass on the football field.
I would like to see this Washington team against this Texas defense that could rush the passer. It would have been a different story, by the way, for me. But looking at the teams, though, look, I think Washington's receivers as a whole were better than Ohio State's as far as college wideouts. But Jeremiah Smith is an X-factor player. I mean, Washington had real speed at that. I mean, Jeremy Bernard was the number 4 receiver on that team. Was he a number 2 receiver at Bama this year? I mean, that Washington wide receiver core was ridiculous at the college level. It wasn't Alabama. Nobody will ever have what Nick Saban had it out. And I'll say this: never. Nobody's going to have 4 first-round picks rolling around in their rotation again. I don't think that'll ever happen again. But that Washington group was on the college level was pretty hellacious as a whole.
Yeah. No, it's a different beast just because you got those 2 running backs you got to deal with. Washington's running game was just complimentary. The running game was just there to set them up to go downfield to those wide receivers, and it was the most vertical passing game in the country. And I always said that Sark was a little jealous of how vertical that passing game. Sark wants to be a downfield passing game. That's exactly what they were. This offense is, that one was probably more dangerous from maybe a big play standpoint, just because Michael Penix can make any throw. Like, Will Howard can't make every throw. Like, he can't make every. They have designed the offense in a fantastic way around his limitations. I mean, I'm not saying he's a bad quarterback. He's a good quarterback. I said he's limited in terms of his arm strength and arm talent. But you got to deal with the running game, and you didn't have to. The running game for Washington, it was okay. It was above average, but it was not the running game that Ohio State has right now with the 2 running backs. Their O-line is not necessarily, to me. That's one thing you can take advantage of too. You can really blow this game wide open if you're Texas and your D-line comes to play. Your D-line comes to play against that O-line, it can be a different story. But the running backs are talented. We talked about there are certain running backs that Texas has dealt with that can actually make them miss and that are talented. The NFL running backs, ETN, Scatterbo's on that list too. These guys are like that. Like, you can have both of them. You can have them wrapped up in space, and they can get you.
Hey, by the way, for some perspective, the Washington 4 wideouts last year, over 3,700 yards combined receiving. 3,700. Ohio State's top 4 this year, like 2,650. And that doesn't mean that has nothing to do with who's going to be great in the NFL or not. But that Washington core 4 group, man, they were scary. And they had
throwing it downfield.
Throwing it to them. Yes.
Yeah, they were throwing it deep a lot.
I will say this: Ohio State's had. I know you said Alabama had those 4, and I agree with it. They were also all upperclassmen at the same time. Yeah. They were juniors and seniors in the same.
Right. That's yeah.
Because Garrett Wilson was at Ohio State, and they had Muhammad as well as Smith and Jigba and those guys. So they had some simultaneous, but they weren't all upperclassmen at the same time with those Alabama guys. All right, a couple more questions here. MJF, with Caleb Downs aligning 12 yards off the ball in the middle and freelancing, how do we exploit that? If our OTs can control the edges, can we find a run game? Rod, you said it was kind of the offensive tackles versus going outside, where, frankly, Ohio State's been really, really good at it this year defending it. What do you think?
It's going to be I'll just be honest. I don't know how effective your running game is going to be versus Ohio State. I hope that it is, but I think Stark should have a plan in case the running game is not working and your wide zone is not working, because there's a really good chance they match up really well with their edges and their linebackers. But I do think if there's a variety in your one game with your counters and your pin and pulls and some of your other gap schemes, inside zone stuff too, and insert inside zone, all that kind of stuff. I do think you have the ability to pop some, because they want to bring Caleb Downs as sometimes almost a linebacker depth. That he comes from that place you're talking about, like the middle of the field, where he just comes, and because of the run, he has a run fit. And if you can, but he's a good player. I mean, it's not like he's missing tackles out there either. I think you can tack the middle of the field, but you got to either get him to declare whether he's dropping, or whether he's dropping back, or whether he's coming up to be in the run fit in the front seven. How you do that, like I said, we'll talk more about it, but I think you gotta force him to respect the formation and the personnel you put out there.
And one difference from the Caleb Downs last year that Texas faced versus this year, one, he's a year older, but two, Rod, correct me if you have a different opinion. I'm not sure he's ever going to be a great man guy in coverage, but Ohio State doesn't put him in that position as much as Nick Saban did. And that's really big for Caleb Downs because, to your point, he gets to play. He's really playing to his maximum strength as a player. Now, that doesn't mean that was Nick Saban's development wouldn't have been better for him over a 3-year period, playing more man at Bama like he did. But I think this scheme for him with the players around him is pretty much a perfect fit because they're not going to put him on the man island much.
Agree. And I think, sometimes with guys like that, you just want to make sure, at least in big games like this, you just weaponize them. So I think that's kind of their way of weaponizing him, putting him at that depth and just allowing him to give him a lot of leeway, a lot of freedom to use his football instincts. And it's kind of what Texas does in the NASCAR with Colin Simmons. It's not that much different. It's like, no, we're actually just going to build this whole package so that you can get a one-on-one on the outside. And then you're going to wreak havoc. And it's like, Caleb Downs, we know you got the best football instincts probably out here on the football field of any of our defenders. So we're just going to let you have the freedom that if you see it, to go make a play on it and be every quarterback's first nightmare because they don't know where you're going to be. So I think that's kind of what it is. And I like it, actually. I think it's working really well for him.
I want to say this. I said Muhammad. I meant to say Marvin Harrison. My apologies for former Ohio State receivers. Tanner Frazier says, Rod, Colin Simmons is a first rounder. I think he is.
Yes, but I didn't mention him because he's not a starter right now for them. Much like I said, he's more situational. But you're right, kind of what Bobby mentioned. Some of these youngsters, I didn't go deep down, but you're right. They will be first round picks. You're right. Anthony Hill's one you mentioned, but you're right. Colin Simmons is there. No doubt. I'm with you.
Yeah, this one, last one today. Should we make Jahdae Barron shadow their number one, Jeremiah Smith?
It's never happened. It would be an ultimate tendency breaker because it'd be like start breaking out the 6-0 line package, which you hadn't done all year long. They haven't done it. I don't remember PK. They don't play a lot of man. Number one, they play like 15% man coverage anyway, and that's not what they've done all year. Now they do follow like the nickel. If he's playing man, you'll see him follow. Now, what you could do, because they're putting Jeremiah Smith in the slot more. Usually his slot percentage is around 17%. It's been hovering around like 35%, 40% here in these two playoff games. So they're moving him around more, trying to hunt some matchups. So you could put Jahdae Barron in the slot, put Gavin Holmes at the corner because if you need coverage, because you're going to need coverage. And Gavin Holmes is a better cover player in terms of coverage than maybe Jalen Gilbo would be if you put him out there. And then maybe put Jahdae Barron back in the slot and say, all right, if they put him, if they're moving him around, you can go with him. Now, we still play zone on that side, but I want you over there where he's at. I want you as close to Jeremiah Smith as we can always get him. And I also think you need to have a plan for him on second and third downs. First downs, maybe you leave your guys out there. See, they want to take their chance and throw on first down, get behind the chains. But on second and third down, you better be ready wherever he is.
Lane C. Wright asked another quick question here. If outside zone doesn't work early, what can Sark really pivot to run-wise? Doesn't seem like many options outside of trick plays. Outside, look, Rod talks about it all the time. Passes to the running backs and to the wide receivers in the flat are basically long handoffs.
Yep.
That's what you pivot to. And one of the things that Jerry has mentioned that I agree with is you haven't had an Isaiah Bond out there to help be part of that.
Yeah.
And he is your best outside running threat from that position, better than Matthew Golden, DeAndre Moore. He actually gives you the ability to maybe take that to the house if somebody misses a tackle. So maybe that changes. Bond was practicing today. So was Cam Williams. I want to reiterate that. I also want to say congratulations to Travis Shaw as we sum up today. Travis Shaw, defensive lineman out of North Carolina, has committed to the University of Texas, 6'5", 335 pounds. CJ has some film up of him on his Twitter. We're going to put some up on our website as well. Hopefully you guys can watch that or link to it at least there. That gives Texas 4 portal commitments on the campaign. And Jerry, the final question for you is a basketball one, buddy. Basketball. Longest horn. He's waited patiently for this. Well, was that the worst Texas basketball performance of all time last night? At least from a rim protection standpoint. What did the A&M get? Like 90% of their points on layups?
48 points in the paint. Yeah, so look, this Texas team, and I've said this all season, is if you're going to maximize, I just look at a team and a way a roster is say, how do you maximize it? Because I think some people say, well, we have to rim protect better, have to rebound better. Well, you got to look at these teams and say, well, how do they maximize? If Trey Johnson has a 2 for 13 game, you're probably going to lose. If Texas has a 8 for 30 from 3 game, you're probably going to lose. The Texas shoots 41-7 from 3. They were 3rd best in America going into this game. And now A&M's one of the better SEC defenses, especially defending the 3-point line. Texas' path to winning is offensive basketball. They're not going to be a great defensive team. They can be a good defensive team. But the whole key is, look, if Trey Johnson is good, if he's going to take most field goals on this team, if he has an off night, they're up against it. If Texas has an off night from 3, they're really up against it. Those two things, if they ever happen in the same game, you're in a bad spot. So this is a team that has to score 75, 77 points in the SEC. And if they can, they have a chance to have a 500 record. If they can't, it's a real uphill battle because they're not going to win a rim protection game against Auburn. They're not going to win a rebounding. They're going to compete on the glass. They've actually been better than being given credit for. But if you miss a lot of shots, the other team should have a lot more rebounds than you do, by the way. If you have an off night shooting, the other team should out-rebound you by 8 or 10 at minimum. But this has to be an offensive basketball team. If you look at the strengths, the players and the strengths on this team, this has to be an offensive basketball team. This is a team that has to win by scoring 75 or 77. And if they get in a game they have to score 82, they got to be able to do it because they're not going to lock people up defensively. You have to play hard defensively. You don't have to be a great defensive team in college basketball. You just have to be good. But the one thing you better be able to do is score 75 to 80 when talent's neutralized. And last night they got dotted.
Yeah.
And the rest of the schedule's only getting tougher from here.
Yeah, Todd Lacey, OTF is the best. Thank you very much, Todd, for saying that. Thanks for what you do. Are there any difference maker transfers from the FCS level? Is there a Jared Verse to win, first round pick out of Albany by way of Florida State? Do we know of anybody out there like that we're hearing about, Jerry? Because I haven't heard one. The tackle that's at Oregon right now that was from Rhode Island. I just haven't heard a bunch of those guys, Todd, and maybe we'll see. Nobody is ranked that way in the portal rankings, but I am somewhat leery of portal rankings at this point. They seem kind of odd to me, just not really based on what I'm seeing realistic. But we'll see. All right. Thanks again, folks, to all of you for hanging out with us on this Sunday night live stream brought to you by our friends at rogueshop.com. Make sure you check them out, rogueshop.com. And thank you to Rod Babers and Jerry Hamilton for hanging out alongside me. Also to Matt Hutchison, our producer in the background, hanging out and everything. There's Rod. He was on fire tonight. Or is that the bonfire? What was that? I don't even know what that was.
From the Batman movie, Dark Knight, wasn't it?
Matt, our producer, comes up with something every time. All right, guys, we'll be back for coffee and football tomorrow morning. Also, check us out on ontexasfootball.com. You guys have a good
wait, I got to say something because the chat started the basketball, Bobby. Texas didn't lose last night because they gave up offensive rebounds. They lost because they scored 60 points. You aren't beating anybody scoring 60 points. I just want to put that out there. They didn't lose because of defense. They didn't lose because of offensive rebounding. They lost because they scored 60 points. You aren't beating anybody scoring 60 points. Not against good teams.
You beat Princeton. You beat Princeton back in the day.
You beat Colorado. You couldn't beat Tennessee in the NCAA tournament last year, and they shot 2 for 20 from three. This is a scoring. Basketball is all about scoring points. You can be good defensive. You don't have to be great, but you better score. Kentucky beat Florida 106 to 100 yesterday. You think Kentucky's defense won the game? Hell no, it didn't win the game. You got to be able to score. This is modern basketball, dude. This is a much different game than it used to be.
Congrats also, just a reminder, to Travis Shaw out of North Carolina committing to the Longhorns. For Jerry, Rod, and Matt, and all of you guys, y'all have a good week ahead, man. Hook 'em.
Hook 'em.